Chapter 1, the pattern he couldn't unsee. The proposal had been exactly what Brandon Dillard intended it to be. No drones. No kneeling crowd. No viral potential. Just a long, unhurried walk down the paved path that curved through the city park, where the trees were in the middle of their annual shedding, and the ground looked like it had been deliberately painted in red and gold. The air had that clean, sharp smell that only showed up in October, the kind that made you breathe deeper without realizing it. He had stopped walking because he'd finished what he was saying. Debbie noticed 2 steps later. She turned, confused, her scarf slipping slightly off one shoulder. What? Brandon didn't kneel. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't smile nervously. I want to marry you, he said. I don't think love should be dramatic to be meaningful. I think it should be steady. I think we already live the way married people say they want to live. I don't want perfect. I want honest. And I want you. She had stared at him for a long second, her expression unreadable. Then she laughed, not mockingly, not dismissively, but with warmth and surprise. You're not even going to make a speech? That was the speech. She said yes. That had been 3 months ago. Now Brandon stood in their living room, remote in his hand, the television muted, the glow of the screen casting light over a moment he had already decided not to let slide. Debbie was curled into the corner of the couch, half watching the show, half reading something on her phone. She hadn't meant to say it. He knew that. Came out the way idle thoughts sometimes did, unfiltered, unexamined. Yeah, Tom from work does that too, she'd said absently. You kind of remind me of him sometimes. Brandon hadn't reacted right away. He never did. He watched patterns the way other people watched weather. Slowly, carefully, with the understanding that one cloud meant nothing, but a sky full of them changed the day. This was the 3rd time. The first time had been a few weeks after the engagement. They'd been cooking dinner, music playing softly in the background, when she'd said something about how he handled conflict, like Matt used to. He hadn't remembered what they were talking about. He hadn't remembered the meal, but he remembered the ease with which the comparison slipped out. The second time had been in the car, driving back from dinner with her parents. She'd mentioned how much her father had liked that one guy I dated before you, James, remember? And then laughed as if it were trivia. Brandon had gone quiet, not hurt, not angry, alert. Now this. He set the remote down on the coffee table. Debbie noticed immediately. What? She asked, looking up. He turned toward her fully, his posture relaxed, his voice even. Can we talk for a minute? Her brow furrowed. About what? About us. She shifted, sitting up straighter. Okay. Brandon folded his hands loosely in front of him. I'm not accusing you of anything. I want to be clear about that. That's a weird way to start, she said, a faint smile pulling at her mouth. I know. That's why I'm starting that way. She waited. In 3 years, he continued, you've never compared me to another man. Not once. Not an ex. Not a coworker. Not hypothetically. And in the last 3 months, you've done it 3 times. With 3 different men. Debbie blinked. I have. Yes. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I didn't even realize. I believe that, he said immediately. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. But I don't know what it means, he went on. And that's the problem. She shifted again, uneasy now. Brandon, I wasn't. I know, he said gently. You weren't doing it on purpose. But something has changed. She shook her head. Nothing has changed. Something has, he said calmly. I don't know if you're getting cold feet. I don't know if you're second-guessing. I don't know if you're doing last-minute comparisons to make sure you picked the best option. I'm not assigning motive. She stared at him. You think I'm shopping? I think something in you is evaluating instead of choosing. That's not fair. It's not an accusation, he said. It's an observation. The room felt suddenly smaller. Debbie crossed her arms. So what are you saying? Brandon held her gaze. I'm saying I'm not getting married while I feel like a bystander in my own relationship. Her chest tightened. So you're breaking up with me? No. The single word landed heavier than a paragraph would have. I'm asking for the ring back. Her breath caught. What? I'm not ending the relationship, he repeated. But I'm pausing the engagement. I won't move forward while I feel like you're still comparing exits. She laughed once, sharp and incredulous. This is insane. I don't think it is. You're punishing me for something I didn't even realize I was doing. I'm protecting my life, he said simply. And yours. Marriage deserves clarity. Silence stretched between them. Finally, with shaking fingers, Debbie slid the ring off and held it out. Brandon took it carefully, as if it were fragile in a way metal usually wasn't. I'm going to stay with my brother for a while, he said. Not to make a point, to give you space to figure out what's going on. And to give myself space to see if this feels different, or just quieter. Her eyes filled. I love you. I know, he said. That's why this matters. He packed a bag. Not angrily. Not dramatically. When the door closed behind him, Debbie stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the place he'd been standing. She didn't cry right away. She sat. Then she called her mother. Chapter 2, Debbie Cain vs. Her own mouth. Debbie Cain sat on the edge of the couch for a full 3 minutes after the door closed. She didn't chase Brandon. She didn't scream his name. She didn't collapse theatrically onto the floor the way people in movies seem to do when their lives cracked open. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, staring at the faint indentation his body had left in the cushion. Her first coherent thought was not, "I can't believe he did that." It was, "Did I really say all that out loud?" She stood abruptly and began pacing, the way she always did when her brain refused to line up neatly. The living room felt accusatory now, every shared object a witness. The throw blanket they'd argued about buying. The framed photo from a weekend trip where they'd laughed so hard she'd snorted and Brandon had pretended not to notice. She stopped pacing and groaned aloud. "Oh my God." The comparisons came rushing back, one by one, each one now wearing a neon sign that read, "Why would you say that? Matt, James, Tom." She hadn't meant anything by them. That was the horrifying part. They weren't loaded with longing or nostalgia. They were throwaway thoughts, observational at best. Her brain made connections the way some people made grocery lists. She just never said them out loud before. Her phone was in her hand before she consciously decided to pick it up. She called her mother. It rang twice. "Deborah Lynn Cain," her mother answered, voice warm and alert. "If this is about the wedding guest list, I told you." Brandon left. There was a pause. Not a dramatic one. The kind that suggested recalibration. He left, Debbie clarified, because apparently that was a thing now. Not stormed out. Not slammed doors. He packed a bag and asked for the ring back and went to Mark's. Another pause. Longer this time. "Are you safe?" her mother asked. "Yes." "Is he?" "Yes." "Okay," her mother said. "Now start from the beginning. Slowly. And don't edit." So Debbie didn't. She told her everything. The comments. The way they slipped out. The conversation. His calm voice. The sentence that wouldn't stop echoing in her head. "Marriage deserves clarity." When she finished, she was breathless and teary and furious with herself in a way that felt deeply unfair. Her mother exhaled. "Well," she said, "you did that." "Mom, I'm not judging," her mother said quickly. "I'm observing." "He thinks I'm shopping," Debbie said miserably. Her mother made a small, thoughtful sound. "Do you think you are?" "No," Debbie said immediately. Then quieter. "I don't think so." That noise again. Debbie flopped back onto the couch. "I love him. I want to marry him. I didn't even realize I was doing it." "I believe you," her mother said. "But intention doesn't cancel impact." "I know," Debbie snapped, then softened. "I know." There was a beat. "Honey," her mother said carefully. "Have you always narrated your thoughts out loud?" Debbie frowned. "What?" "You talk to process," her mother continued. "You always have. Your brain moves fast, your mouth tries to keep up, and sometimes it doesn't stop to check if the room needs to hear the commentary." Debbie stared at the ceiling. "Oh, and," her mother added, "engagement does funny things to people." "How so?" "It makes everything suddenly feel permanent," she said. "And permanence makes some people reflective. Not because they want something else, but because they're closing doors." Debbie swallowed. "I wasn't comparing him to see who was better," she said slowly. "I think I was noticing how different he is." Her mother hummed. "And instead of saying, 'I appreciate how you handle conflict,' you said, 'You remind me of Matt.'" Debbie groaned again. "Why am I like this?" "Because you're human," her mother said. "And because you're used to dating being temporary. Engagement isn't." Debbie sat up. "So what do I do?" "Well," her mother said, "you don't panic. Too late. You don't chase him," she continued. "I didn't." "Good. And you don't minimize his concern." "I didn't mean—" "I know," her mother said gently. "But he didn't overreact. He set a boundary." Debbie pressed her lips together. "He always does that." Calmly. "Like it's a skill." "It is a skill," her mother said. "One you may need to meet him halfway on." Debbie stared at the wall again. "He asked for the ring back." "I know. I gave it to him. I'm proud of you." That surprised her. "You are?" "Yes," her mother said. "Because you respected what he needed even though it hurt." Debbie blinked rapidly. "Come home," her mother said. "What? Pack a bag and come home for a few days," she repeated. "Not because you're running away. Because you need perspective that isn't inside that apartment." Debbie hesitated. "What if he thinks I'm giving up?" "If Brandon Dillard thought like that," her mother said dryly, "he'd be a very different man." Despite herself, Debbie laughed. A wet, hiccuping sound that surprised them both. "Okay," she said. "I'll come." She hung up and moved through the apartment in a daze, packing without urgency. She passed the mirror in the hallway and paused, studying her own face. "You talk too much," she told her reflection. "And somehow not enough." The drive to her parents' house was quiet, the radio untouched. By the time she pulled into the familiar driveway, the ache in her chest had dulled into something more focused. Her mother opened the door before she knocked. No hugs, no theatrics, just a long look and a hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure it out," her mother said. That night, lying in her childhood bedroom, Debbie replayed the moment Brandon had muted the television. Not with anger, with concern. She realized then that this wasn't about other men. It was about whether she was brave enough to stop filling silence with noise and start choosing, deliberately, the life she said she wanted. And for the first time since the door closed behind him, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt called out. Chapter 3, The Brothers' Couch Doctrine. Mark Dillard's couch had seen things. It had been purchased during a breakup, reupholstered during a reconciliation, and permanently indented during a phase Mark referred to as the year I slept sitting up because my marriage was technically alive but spiritually deceased. Brandon sat on that couch now, duffel bag at his feet, shoes still on, hands folded like he was waiting to be called into an office. Mark stood in the doorway with 2 beers. He took one look at Brandon's posture and sighed. "You're not going to cry, are you? Because I just cleaned." "No," Brandon said. "I'm not crying." "Good." Mark handed him a bottle. "Because this couch absorbs emotions and then releases them at night. It's a whole thing." Brandon took the beer. "Thanks for letting me stay." Mark waved it off. "You're my brother. Also, I like knowing I'm not the only one making questionable life choices." Brandon took a sip. "I don't think this was questionable." "See," Mark said, plopping into the armchair opposite him. "Already healthier than me." They sat in silence for a moment. The TV was on but muted, some home renovation show where people pretended shiplap fixed marriages. "So," Mark said eventually. "Ring." Brandon nodded once. "Asked for it?" "Yes." "Got it?" "Yes." Mark whistled softly. "Damn. I didn't end the relationship. I didn't say you did." "I'm not angry," Brandon added. "I also didn't say that." Brandon looked over. "You're enjoying this?" Mark shrugged. "I enjoy clarity. It's rare." Brandon leaned back slightly, eyes on the ceiling. "She's been comparing me to other men." Mark blinked. "What, like, physically?" "No." "Sexually?" "No." "Because that would have been a different couch conversation." "It was casual," Brandon said. "Observational. But new." Mark took a long drink. "And you don't like new." "I don't like unexplained," Brandon corrected. "Ah." Mark nodded. "There it is. You don't panic. You analyze. You set boundaries like a damn HR department." "That's not fair." "It's accurate," Mark said. "Also impressive." Brandon was quiet. "I don't want to marry someone who isn't fully choosing me," he said finally. "Not because I need reassurance. Because marriage multiplies whatever uncertainty exists." Mark considered that. "You know, most people would have yelled." "I know. Some would have pretended they didn't notice." "I know. Some would have proposed harder," Mark said. "Like it's a volume issue." Brandon huffed once. "That never works." Mark leaned forward. "So what do you want?" Brandon thought about it. Really thought about it. "I want her to understand what she's doing," he said. "And decide if she wants this. Without pressure. Without me standing there waiting. And if she decides no, then I'd rather know now." Mark nodded slowly. "You're terrifying. I've been told." They sat again, the weight of it settling in. After a minute, Mark said, "Can I tell you something without you turning it into a spreadsheet?" "Yes." "I married your sister-in-law because I was afraid of losing her," Mark said. "Not because I was sure. And fear ages badly." Brandon looked at him. "I wish I'd paused," Mark continued. "I wish I'd asked harder questions before signing a contract I didn't read emotionally." Brandon absorbed that. "You're not running," Mark finished. "You're standing still and asking her to meet you there." That night, Brandon lay on the couch staring at the ceiling fan as it clicked rhythmically overhead. He missed Debbie, her presence, her noise, the way she filled space without trying. But he didn't regret the pause. For the first time since the proposal, he wasn't wondering what came next. He was waiting to see who chose to walk there. Chapter 4, Accidental Honesty. Debbie Cain discovered very quickly that silence was not neutral. Silence was a mirror. At her parents' house, there was no shared television hum. No Brandon moving quietly through the kitchen. No familiar cadence of daily check-ins. Her mother gave her space with professional precision. Her father offered neutral kindness and exactly one comment. "Let me know if you want pancakes," which Debbie recognized as emotional support in its purest form. By the second morning, Debbie was talking to herself. Out loud. "Okay," she told the bathroom mirror, toothbrush foaming. "New rule. Think first." The mirror did not respond. She packed her work bag and drove to the office, hyper-aware of every word she said before it escaped. It was exhausting. Her thoughts queued up impatiently and used to waiting their turn. At work, everything felt slightly off, as if the furniture had been rearranged an inch to the left. Tom was already at his desk when she arrived. "Morning, Debbie," he said, swiveling his chair. "You look tired." Normally, she would have replied with something breezy and self-deprecating. Normally, she might have added a commentary track about how her fiancé functioned on 5 hours of sleep and caffeine alone. Instead, she paused. "I am," she said simply. "Rough week." Tom nodded sympathetically. "You want to grab lunch later?" "My treat." There it was. Not blatant. Not inappropriate. Just enough. Debbie surprised herself. No, she said kindly but firmly. But thank you. Tom blinked. Oh, okay. She turned to her computer, heart pounding. Not because she'd done something dramatic, but because she hadn't filled the moment with explanations. She didn't narrate. She didn't soften. She didn't compare. She just chose. At lunch, she sat alone and realized something unsettling. She missed Brandon's quiet presence. The way he listened without interrupting. The way he didn't need constant verbal affirmation to feel secure, but offered it anyway, deliberately. She'd always thought his calm meant he didn't need reassurance. Now she wondered if she'd mistaken steadiness for silence. That evening, her mother found her sitting on the back porch, staring at nothing. You're thinking loudly, her mother observed. Debbie sighed. I talk because I'm afraid if I don't, I'll disappear. Her mother sat beside her. And Brandon, he doesn't talk unless it matters, Debbie said. And I think I filled that space without realizing it. Her phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. I hope you're okay. That was it. No pressure. No follow-up. Debbie stared at the screen for a long time before replying. I'm thinking. Thank you for giving me space. She didn't add anything else. It was the hardest thing she'd done all day. Across town, Brandon read the message twice. He didn't analyze punctuation. He didn't search for subtext. He noted the absence of panic. He slept better than he had the night before. Debbie spent the next day doing something radically uncomfortable. She listened. She listened to her thoughts without immediately exporting them. She noticed how often comparisons popped up, not because she wanted alternatives, but because she processed life relationally. Everything made sense when placed next to something else. But marriage wasn't a comparison exercise. It was a commitment to stop measuring and start building. That night, lying in her childhood bed again, Debbie finally cried. Not from fear, from clarity. She missed him, not as an idea, not as a safety net, as a person she chose deliberately. And for the first time since he'd left, she didn't want to explain that to anyone. She wanted to show it. Chapter 5, Negotiation Without Lawyers. They met at a coffee shop neither of them loved. That felt important. It was neutral ground. Too loud to whisper, too public to unravel, too inconvenient to linger. The barista knew neither of their names. The chairs were uncomfortable by design. Brandon arrived first and chose a table near the window. He set his phone face down and folded his hands, posture relaxed but alert, like someone waiting for a conversation that mattered. Debbie arrived 6 minutes later, not late enough to make a statement, not early enough to look eager. She spotted him immediately and stopped for half a second before approaching. He looked the same, clean jacket, calm expression, eyes that noticed without staring. Hey, she said. Hey, he replied. They didn't hug. They ordered separately. When they sat, there was a brief silence that neither rushed to fill. Debbie broke it first. Thank you for meeting me. I didn't want this to happen by text, Brandon said. Me neither. She wrapped her hands around her cup, not for warmth but grounding. I've been doing a lot of thinking, she began. He nodded. I assumed. I wasn't comparing you because I was looking for someone else, she said. I was comparing because I talk to think, and I didn't realize how careless that was with something permanent. He listened without interruption. I see now how it sounded, she continued. Like I was evaluating. Like you were provisional. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That's what scared me, he said. I know, she said. And I'm sorry. He didn't respond immediately. He took a sip of coffee, considering. I'm not offended easily, he said. But marriage isn't a place I'm willing to feel optional. You weren't, she said quickly, then stopped herself. You aren't. He looked at her steadily. Then help me understand why it started after the engagement. She exhaled. Because engagement made it real. Not romantic real. Real. He waited. I've always narrated relationships, she said. Compared, contextualized, explained them out loud like I was writing liner notes. Engagement made me realize I couldn't do that anymore. And instead of sitting with that fear, I filled the space with noise. He absorbed that. You didn't say anything until the third time, she added quietly. Why? Because patterns matter, he said. And because accusing someone without understanding is worse than waiting. That's infuriatingly mature. He smiled faintly. I get that a lot. She smiled back, then sobered. I don't want to lose you because I didn't know when to shut up. This isn't about silence, he said. It's about intention. She nodded. Then here's mine. I want to marry you. Not because you're the safest option. Because you're the one I choose when I stop talking and start listening. He considered her for a long moment. I'm not putting the ring back on yet, he said. I didn't expect you to. But I'm willing to keep talking, he continued. With structure. She blinked. Structure. Yes, he said. Honesty without narration. Check-ins without defensiveness. If something feels off, we say it when it happens, not 3 months later. She smiled, relieved. I can do that. And, he added, if either of us feels unsure, we pause. Not spiral. Agreed. They sat there, the tension easing, not gone, but reorganized into something workable. When they stood to leave, there was no dramatic resolution, just a quiet understanding. As they walked out separately, Debbie felt something unexpected. Not butterflies, stability. Chapter 6, the worst date of his life? That isn't a date. Brandon did not want to go. He had said that clearly, calmly, and with supporting logic. Mark had ignored all of it. She's not a date, Mark said, leaning against the kitchen counter with the smug confidence of a man who confused persistence with wisdom. She's a person, a human woman, who eats food. That's a date, Brandon replied. That's dinner, Mark corrected. With someone who is not your fiancé, because you are currently in a self-imposed emotional holding pattern. Brandon took a slow breath. I am not in a holding pattern. I'm paused. Paused men are the worst men, Mark said cheerfully. They overthink and underlive. Go eat pasta with Lydia, who I don't know. You know her name. I know her name because you keep saying it. Mark grinned. See? Already building intimacy. Brandon stared at the fridge like it might offer asylum. This accomplishes nothing, Brandon said. It accomplishes perspective, Mark countered. And if nothing else, it'll remind you that dating at 31 is a nightmare and you should appreciate what you had. That, unfortunately, landed. So Brandon found himself sitting in an Italian restaurant that leaned aggressively into exposed brick and dim lighting, across from Lydia, who was perfectly pleasant in the way people often were when there was nothing wrong with them, and nothing right either. So, she said, smiling, Mark says you're very steady. Brandon blinked. That's an interesting adjective. He said you're calm. Like, unnervingly calm. I've heard that. She laughed. I'm the opposite. I cry at commercials. Which ones? All of them. The server arrived. They ordered. Small talk followed, competent but hollow like a well-written resume. Lydia talked about her job. Brandon listened. He nodded at appropriate intervals. He asked thoughtful follow-up questions because that was how he was wired. Halfway through her story about a workplace reorganization, Brandon realized something unsettling. He was doing everything right, and he felt absolutely nothing. Not boredom, not irritation, just absence. Lydia paused. Sorry, am I rambling? No, he said honestly. You're explaining. She smiled. You're very attentive. I try to be. She tilted her head. Your ex must have loved that. The word landed like a dropped glass. He didn't flinch. Fiancé, he corrected gently. We're paused. Oh, Lydia winced. I'm sorry. Mark didn't say. It's fine, Brandon said. And it was. This isn't a date. She laughed, relieved. Good, because I didn't wear a date shirt. That's a thing. Absolutely. This is my safe stranger sweater. Brandon smiled despite himself. The conversation picked up again, lighter now, unburdened by expectation. Lydia was funny, sharp, engaged, and still nothing. As dessert menus arrived, Brandon found himself thinking not about Lydia, but about Debbie. About the way she filled silence like she was afraid of it disappearing. About the way she laughed too loud and explained too much and loved with her whole, unfiltered self. He missed how she argued, direct but emotional, passionate without cruelty. He missed how she talked through ideas like they were puzzles she couldn't solve alone. He missed her noise. The server returned. Lydia ordered tiramisu. Brandon declined. You sure? She asked. It's very good. I know, he said. But I don't want it. She studied him for a moment. You're very sure of what you don't want. Yes. And what you do want? He hesitated. That's clarifying itself. She smiled softly. Good answer. When the check came, Brandon paid without discussion. Outside, the air was cool and honest. This was nice, Lydia said. Truly. I agree, Brandon said. Thank you for understanding what it wasn't. She laughed. Honestly, I could tell 5 minutes in. You were present, but not available. He nodded. That's fair. As he drove home, Brandon didn't feel tempted, conflicted, or guilty. He felt confirmed. At Mark's house, he tossed his keys onto the counter. Well, Mark called from the living room. It wasn't a date, Brandon said. Mark leaned back. And I don't want to be anywhere else but where I already was. Mark raised an eyebrow. That so? Yes. Good, Mark said. Because Lydia texted me to say you're emotionally unavailable but impeccably polite. Brandon snorted. Accurate. That night, Brandon texted Debbie. I learned something tonight. She replied a few minutes later. What did you learn? That absence clarifies faster than distraction. There was a pause. Then, I'm glad. So was he. Chapter 7, Debbie Cain, unscripted. Debbie didn't plan what she was going to say. That, in itself, felt like progress. She asked Brandon if they could walk. No cafe, no structure, no table to hide behind. Just movement. He suggested the same park where he'd proposed, which felt either poetic or cruel depending on how you looked at it. They met near the entrance. Late afternoon light slanting low through the trees. Early spring had stripped the branches bare, but buds were forming small, stubborn promises. "Hi," Debbie said. "Hi," Brandon replied. They started walking. For several minutes, neither spoke. Debbie let the silence stretch, her instincts screaming to fill it. She resisted, breathing through the discomfort like her mother had taught her to do when she was a teenager spiraling over nothing. Finally, she spoke. "I'm not going to explain," she said. Brandon glanced at her, curious but not startled. "Okay. I'm not going to give context or background, or walk you through my internal wiring like it's a guided tour." He nodded once. "All right." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I love you," she said. "I want to marry you. And when you asked for the ring back, it hurt. But it was fair." He held her gaze. "I talk when I'm afraid," she continued. "And I was afraid of how final everything suddenly felt. Not because I wanted something else. Because I didn't want to mess this up." She swallowed. "I compared you to other men because my brain reaches for reference points when it doesn't know how to sit still. But you're not a reference point. You're the choice." Brandon was very still now. "I don't need you to reassure me," she added. "I don't need you to chase me. I need you to know that when I stop talking, it's not distance, it's intention." She took a breath, hands trembling slightly. "And if that's not enough, I understand. But I won't dilute it." The silence that followed was different from before. Not tense, deliberate. Brandon exhaled slowly. "Thank you," he said, "for not cushioning that." "I almost did," she admitted. "It was physically painful not to." He smiled faintly. "I could tell." They resumed walking. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were," Debbie said. "I think we were coasting more than we realized." "I agree," Brandon said. "We were good at being stable. Not as good at being examined." She laughed softly. "That's the least romantic sentence I've ever heard." "And yet," he said, "here we are." They reached the spot where he'd stopped 3 months earlier. Neither mentioned it. They didn't need to. "I'm not ready to put the ring back on," he said. "But I am ready to keep building." Debbie nodded. "Me too." He reached into his jacket pocket and held out the ring. Not offering it, just showing it. "I kept it," he said. "Not as leverage. As a placeholder." Her eyes stung. "That feels very on-brand for you." "I'm aware." They stood there, the park quiet around them. This time, when silence came, Debbie didn't fear it. She stood in it. With him. Chapter 8. Rewriting the contract. They didn't move back in together right away. That was Debbie's suggestion, which surprised both of them. "I don't want us to slide back into comfort and call it growth," she said, standing in Brandon's kitchen a week after their walk. "I want us to choose each other on purpose for a minute." Brandon considered that, then nodded. "That's reasonable." She laughed. "You say that like you're approving a budget request." "I am approving a budget request," he said. "An emotional one." They set rules which somehow felt romantic in its own way. No comparisons. Not out loud. Not jokingly. Not disguised as anecdotes. No disappearing into silence either. If something felt off, they named it within 24 hours, even if all they could say was, "Something feels off and I don't know why yet." They scheduled weekly check-ins like a standing meeting neither of them resented. Debbie moved back into the apartment gradually. A sweater here. Shoes there. Her toothbrush returned like a small but significant treaty. The first night she slept over again. She lay awake listening to Brandon breathe beside her, resisting the urge to narrate the moment. Instead, she reached for his hand. He squeezed back. No commentary required. A few days later, they cooked dinner together for the first time since the pause. Debbie caught herself mid-sentence twice, smiled once, and let silence finish the thought. Brandon noticed everything. "You're quieter," he said, not unkindly. "I'm more deliberate," she corrected. He smiled. "I like it." "I still talk," she warned. "I don't want you not to," he said. "I just want it to be intentional." The night he gave her the ring back, there was no speech. They were sitting on the couch, takeout containers balanced precariously between them, a terrible movie playing in the background. He reached into his pocket and placed the ring in her palm. "I'm choosing you," he said. Again, with clearer eyes. Debbie closed her fingers around it, tears immediate and unashamed. "I'm choosing you," she said. Without commentary, she slid the ring back on. It fit the same, but it felt earned. They didn't announce it right away. They let it be theirs first. The wedding plans restarted slowly, intentionally smaller than before. One evening, Debbie's grandmother visited and eyed the ring knowingly. "You two fight?" she asked. "Yes," Debbie said. "Good," her grandmother said. "Means you care." Debbie grinned. "Do you still get butterflies with Grandpa?" Her grandmother laughed. "No, but I give him high blood pressure." "That's basically the same thing." Brandon nearly choked on his tea. Debbie leaned into him, smiling. This time, there was no need to explain why. Chapter 9, High Blood Pressure. They got married on a Thursday. Not because it was symbolic, because it was cheaper. The courthouse steps were clean in the way public buildings always were, over-maintained, faintly echoing, indifferent to personal significance. Debbie stood between her parents and Brandon's brother Mark, holding a small bouquet she'd bought that morning from a florist who did not ask questions. Brandon wore the same suit he'd worn to his cousin's wedding 3 years earlier. Debbie wore a simple dress that zipped up the back without assistance, which she considered a small personal victory. No one live-streamed anything. No one clapped. The judge mispronounced Debbie's middle name and corrected herself without apology. Brandon didn't mind. Debbie found it hilarious. When it was over, when the paperwork was signed and stamped and officially absorbed into bureaucracy, Brandon took Debbie's hand with the same deliberate care he'd always used. "Well," Mark said, clapping once, "you're legally bound." Debbie grinned. He already was. Emotionally. Brandon raised an eyebrow. "Let's not overstate." They went to lunch at a small restaurant nearby, the kind that didn't take reservations and didn't pretend to be memorable. Debbie's grandmother arrived last, leaning on her cane, eyes sharp and amused. She looked at Brandon, then Debbie, then their joined hands. "So," she said, "you figured it out?" "We did," Debbie said. Her grandmother nodded. "Good. Love isn't loud. It's persistent." She turned to Brandon. "You know she'll talk you into an early grave." Brandon smiled. "I've accounted for that. And you," her grandmother said to Debbie, "better stop narrating your life like someone's grading it." Debbie laughed. "Working on it." They ate. They talked. They didn't perform. Later that evening, alone in their apartment again, no longer paused, no longer provisional, Debbie kicked off her shoes and leaned back against the couch. "So," she said, then stopped herself. Brandon waited. She smiled. "I'm happy." He nodded. "Me too." The television played softly. Outside, the city went on, unaware. Debbie rested her head on his shoulder. No butterflies, just the steady rise of blood pressure, and the quiet certainty that meant she'd chosen well.